Good morning. We're going to continue our discussion this morning on structures. But before that, one administrative announcement. On February 26th, I will not be here. So if anyone wants to teach that Sunday morning, let me know. Otherwise, you can all come in and sit pretty much like this, but just stare at each other. And then March 22nd, 24th, I won't be here either. Thank you, March 19th. So 2 dates available if you want to teach a morning class. Let me know. Topic of your choice. So there are 46 slides this morning. Most of them are just thought builds to get us on to the next topic point of the conversation. But it only takes us into an early part of the discussion overall. So we will close this morning with a discussion of whether or not we want to continue talking about the church as a structure. Of course, we've spent the last 3 weeks talking about government, economics, and now we're going to talk about the church. Big picture, structures, organizations, why, whether or not it's important to God. And so we'll continue that this morning about the church. I'm talking about the church as a structure across all of it. So, I also don't have my phone, so I won't be able to read ahead and build the slides. So 40 slides is a lot. We're going to go on a journey of discovery here and figure out what it was that I made 40 slides about. So first, there will be some affirmation in here for us, but this discussion is not why we do the things we do as a body, as a church. All right? This is about how the early church ran itself. And then we'll talk about the not-so-early church, potentially. And then if we choose to continue the discussion next week, the really not early church. So, that changes over time. This is Acts. With some reference to the other parts of the New. So, the first church. Would we agree it's Jerusalem? That's where the apostles are. That's where they first preach. That's where they first speak. So I think it's the first church. Discussions? Arguments? Recommendations? No? General consensus? Okay. So, they write a book on it. Some people get against. I doubt very seriously the building even exists today. But that's okay. So how'd they do the first church? How'd they meet in Jerusalem? What'd they do? Huh? They did, partially. Most of the early discussion about them is meeting in the courtyard. And that's where that's where Peter and John and everyone spoke. That's where the people were. If you wanted to talk to the people and you needed a gathering, that's where they were. Plenty of space in the courtyard. Nobody minds if different groups and organizations meet there, and so they do. I wouldn't use the term preacher. I'm going to use the term apostle, but it's important why I'm making the distinction later in the church. Because that's what the apostles do. They do. They go to the people in a different way than we think of any current position in the church. They're apostles. We're going to talk about that. It's significant. So I pulled out a verse. So yes, house to house, temple courts. That's where they operate and how they function. And it's really just a general body. Because you got to go somewhere at night, right? May as well go to your house. It's where you get up in the morning too. And if your family is a family of newfound believers, then you include some of that in your daily life. Because for the Jewish people, it was supposed to be part of their life all day, every day, wrapped up in and around them. That's what the law and Deuteronomy are for. So they're allowed to do this right up until the priests get upset. They're the landowner. And we're going to jump around in time a little bit as we discuss each topic. So this is the stoning of Stephen, right? But even before that, they get drama from the priests. Because the priests love the fact that more people are coming every day right up until they realize they're not listening to them. And then they're not a fan. From years. And that's the fact they have to flee. A lot of believers flee Jerusalem, which actually just does God's work. They just take that compact group of believers who've been taught by the apostles, and it sprinkles them out into the empire like leaven. And they just go out there and grow.
Yeah, but don't you think also, Ray, that had something to do with the fact that they were the Levites, they were this tribe. We were the priests, we're the ministers, we're the people who know the word. Out there, it's the people, because then it basically makes their entire tribe irrelevant.
Yes, I think that's a factor. In fact, we're going to talk about priests as a part of all this later, because that is a key difference in Christianity. You're a priest. Congratulations. I hope you earn the position and title.
I think also a big part of being Jewish is they were told time and time again to purge the evil from among you. So seeing this new group to them, it could have been, hey, this isn't right. They're not teaching the right things.
Right. So did you guys hear that over there? And you're correct. The Jewish people were charged with keeping the Lord's word correct, holy, and right. Blasphemy was a given. If you ever wanted to get your enemy stoned, just claim blasphemy and walk away. So they spread them out into the empire. We're going to get into the apostles, we're going to get into deacons, we're going to get into elders, and we're going to get into leadership. So, the apostles. If you give Acts a cursory read, it feels like they're leading the early church. If they are, it's very soft leadership, because it's not part of the Jewish personality for them to have a strong person. Since the judges. Because if you read Acts, what the apostles do is go and preach the word. And every time a leadership test comes up, they fall back. They either appoint someone to do it, or they go seek a group of people to bring them into the decision-making process because of who the Jewish people are. And that affects how the church grows and the church that we are today. The apostles aren't elders the way we think of elders. That's a growth and change in a position over 2,000 years. It's okay. Don't have a heart attack. We're going to get there. But what did the apostles do? Whenever there was work to be done, what did they do? The answer's on the board. Yeah, they go get someone to do it. They run a Hey You roster that's very deep, and they select people. But even in the selection of the deacons, who did they turn to? The people. They said, select from amongst yourselves people that we can approve and appoint. It's not a bad leadership technique, because you reserve the right of refusal, acknowledging that you're going to take the blame anyway, but you let the people figure out who it is they want. Organization in their image, and everybody in the organization is like, no, we're not with you on this. So it's a soft form of leadership. It's not their focus, is what I would offer you. What's their focus? Yeah, speaking the word, Christ crucified only. It's all they do. It's all they want to do. You got to imagine I imagine every time they try to get into the decision making, the Spirit's like, hey, it's not your job. Go over here and talk to this guy. And in fact, there are a couple of chapters of Acts where the Spirit does exactly that. It throws the apostles all over the place. And only then do they come back and discuss the church again. After it's been demonstrated to the apostles that their time and their life and their words are no longer their own, they belong to God. This is the verses about that. And in fact, this is immediately after all of what I just said. Paul's been thrown out to talk to the eunuch. Philip's been thrown out to talk to the eunuch. Paul's been thrown out of town a couple of times to go see people. And all the apostles want to do is what the Spirit has been brought upon them to do, which is talk about the Lord, Christ crucified, salvation. And what? Yes. Yeah, I think that's in there, right? We will give our attention to prayer and to the ministry of the Word. So, that's our first church. Immediately after that, in Acts, it starts talking about these other local areas, and this is where we start getting into the greater Yeah, does that work? Yes, it was exactly that. The closest our mind can get to around that. It's not the temple, but it is the place where we have decided is holy enough, or we can consecrate it enough to store the Torah and bring ourselves in to talk about it. And they're everywhere. For as long as the Jews have been allowing somebody else to put a pole on a hill, they have been building their own places to worship, especially in the years of exile and captivity. So they're the first places that everyone goes when they go to a place where there are Jews to preach the word. And Scripture says that. He goes to the synagogue. It's the first place Paul ever goes. He walks into town, he's like, where's your synagogue? And he heads there. And homes. So we continue to see a pattern. They meet wherever they actually can meet, but they also put it in their lives and in their associations with their family and with their greater community. There was rarely a time in the early church where it wasn't persecuted somewhere. The only time Scripture says it actually was not, and there was a time of peace, is this one right here. And it's just for a little while, just long enough for them to leave Jerusalem. Because the minute they go to other communities, what do? They start talking about the Lord, and they plant a church there. And that immediately stirs up trouble in the local community, because everything changes. The way they look at the world, the way they interact with the world, their purpose in the world all changes, and it's very un-Roman. And that creates drama and problems everywhere they go. So, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, the farther away you get removed from actual demonstration of God's power as we understand it, with God claiming it, the more disrespectful we get. Plus, familiarity breeds contempt. Eh,
I think the messaging is kind of, and it's not true. The message that always just gets preached is just Jesus is love. That's all that it is. Jesus is just love. Just love, man.
Sounds like you're speaking against that. That's not love. Check any relationship you're in and ask yourself if that's love. Doing whatever you want with no regard for the relationship. That's self-love.
So, Josh watched State of Union with me, and was asking questions and stuff, and we talked about this. And the way I explained to Josh was, you know, God loves us enough, He gave us free will, and people are going to choose how they choose to live. And if they come to me and ask questions about how Christians live, I'm going to tell them. But when we leave them free to live by their choice, I believe that we're supposed to do that. However, there are consequences to those choices. So, two things are true. Judgment is real, and Jesus is love. But Jesus' love calls for repentance and following His way.
I hope you all heard that. You need to write that down. We're going to hand it out.
Our society handicap is that we only have one word for love.
Yes, so did you hear that?
For love. So they can separate out lust from
Yeah.
Jesus.
And I think that in modern times, we have purposefully mistaught the definition of love.
We define love the way we want to.
Yeah.
This suits us.
Out into Lydia, Joppa, Caesarea. By the way, there are 100 Caesareas. Pick one. And that's all in Acts chapter 9, verses 30 through 10:48. All of that initial movement and going around to these places, and each of them are introduced to us and spoken of in Scripture. And it's the same thing over and over and over again. Immediately after that, we talk about Phoenicia, Cyprus, and Antioch. And it's the same concept. And this is all within the first, timelines are so hard in Acts. 12 years, 20 years, what? Maybe earlier. Acts happens very quickly, and then nothing happens at all, and then more stuff happens very quickly.
This is about 10 or 12
Okay.
years what we're talking about here.
So it's not a long time. And people are already dying. So why is the apostolic age so important? As long as the apostles are alive, they can control the message, the organization, and the structure of what they call the church, which to them isn't a body at all of people and an organizational task organization structure. To them, the church is only people. And all that's about to change at the end of the apostolic age. Right now, in the story, stick on the back person and ignore, is alive and well in all these cities. And it's being scratched into little buildings because there's some persecution going on. Now, by the way, Rome is filthy with graffiti, and so is most of the Roman Empire. I don't mean that every single building has been tagged by some crazy clown, but it's a part of their culture to write your political anger on the side of someone else's wall. And they do. And then it gets whitewashed away, and a week later, someone else's frustration goes up on the side of the building. So you can get away with hiding a lot of things in plain sight. That's what that does. When you make the world a wall of color, you can hide things within it. And so that little symbol begins to get etched into the side of buildings, and it acts as a waypoint and a marker for where to go and what you can find. Because there are 3 periods of minor persecution, and we're about to get into a major period of persecution at the end of the apostolic age. And it's going to change the way people see and they conduct and they perform church. But as long as the apostles are around, we're kind of safe. Because what do? They control the decisions that are made. We talked about this a little bit, and we're going to talk about it again. And they keep everybody on the straight and narrow. And when the Spirit is telling you whether or not you can trust someone, they believe it. And they do a thing with that information. Like, take people out of the equation so they can no longer disagree with that? By very beginning. Yes, the patriarchs, by the way, were elders, considered elders in their particular tribe. There's rarely one elder. A voting party of one doesn't satisfy anyone's requirements in any time for leadership when we're talking about moving the tribes around. It is the group of old men of the tribe who come together to make decisions. And they're very consistent. We see it, and we see the acts of it all the way through the time of the patriarchs. Let's see, let's find that. I thought I had it somewhere. All right, I guess I deleted it. So yes, what did Moses set up? Let's talk about Moses and his father-in-law Jethro, because that's key. Is everybody familiar with this story? So Jethro, actually it's kind of funny, right? Jethro hears that his son is doing well, his son-in-law, and he goes to see him for that reason. The Bible is very specific. However, who is Moses to Jethro? He's a member of his tribe. Jethro is an elder in his tribe, and he speaks to Moses that way. And so Moses might be the guy speaking to God, to Moses and the Israelites. To Jethro, he's a member of his tribe, and he has to elder him. And he does. And he sees Moses just exhausting himself trying to make every single little decision, and he says, stop, you have this thing already in place in your people and your culture to do these little things. Why have you not activated it and appointed people to run things? And so Moses does. But there's a key phrase at the end of that. And it says, and they acted as judges. So you got to keep that in context. So when they made decisions, they were binding. And you could not like it, but you would live with it. Leadership overall. Talking specifically just about elders, the people who ran the village, that stays consistent. And it is consistent all the way through to the time of Jesus. Every little village had some little group of elders. Depending upon what part of Scripture you're a most fan of, either they sat outside the city all day just kind of hanging out, waiting to make a decision, or they met somewhere in the city at a certain time each week, and people could bring them cases. Odds are it was a little bit of both, depending upon where you lived, how old they were, and how far into their retirement they wanted to pretend to be. Because old men do nothing but sit around and talk in the Bible. Adventures are for the young. So that's what Jesus grows up with, and that's what the Israelite people grow up with. But these guys aren't priests. There's an important distinction. Who are the priests? the tribe of Levi, right? Set aside specifically to conduct the worship of the Lord and work that spiritual side of the relationship, while these guys run the corporate side, if you need two terms to define it. So, but they did lead. And you can't deny them that, because it's an impact, and it's a blueprint, and it's a pattern for what goes on after. And so whenever the apostles go somewhere and they make a decision, they pull these guys in. The decision about circumcision, Scripture is clear. It says the decision was made by the elders and the apostles. Which is who's the lead elder in the Lord. And then get him introduced into the story. He's not an apostle. He's never going to be an apostle. That's not his function and role. But he does gather together with the old men, and they provide advice and wisdom and support to the decision making, so that when the message is taken out from the apostles, it has a stamp of approval of our old men who we expect and have always expected to make our decisions. And it gives it a lot of reinforcement. If it was just the apostles sending it out, it's just another message from these crazy Christians. And now they're making rules. Probably not well received amongst the greater Hebrew community. That's what that letter is. If you read the first part of that letter, that's exactly what, or that verse, that's what it says. They sent out a letter from the apostles and the elders. They needed their cooperation, their concurrence, in order to make it stick. And that's what the elders do when we're talking about them in the Old Testament or the New Testament. So, move over to Paul. Elders are a little different for Paul. Paul's the last of the apostles. What is he preparing the world for? Paul stares down death for at least 10 years until it finally comes for him. And this entire time, he's doing nothing but preparing people.
But as early as his second missionary journey, he was appointing elders.
Yes. Yes. What do they do for him? This is a great segue. What does he have them do? One, they stay behind and they perform this elder function to help lead the church and keep the word true. But he also uses them as a corporate body. Every time Paul travels with money, before it talks about Titus, he sends the elders and some select people to deliver it. Because it's got to come from the people. And who do the people trust? They trust their elders. They send them on little missionary journeys with bags of money back to Judea and say, here, you're about to have a famine because it's been prophesied. And they give them money. And Paul sends other little groups of elders to other churches to do what? To build and strengthen their relationships, not to create authorities. Sir. Yes. So if you guys didn't hear that, Reb was making the point that those guys always come from within. In a secular overlordship, this body. Hey, wait, that might be 1,700 years of history. We'll get there, but not this week. So yes, he does exactly what Rod said, and there's a purpose and a reason for it. And so he gives them some additional responsibilities once he's gone. Because what happens when the apostles fade? You've got that immediate second generation that they have taught. This is Titus, Timothy, trying to dig up some of the other Greek names. There's a lot of Barnabases. I'm not talking about that first generation guy. And then you get some Greek philosophers who do a lot of damage. And they're the third generation guys. And that's what Paul always feared. As soon as the apostles fade and the Spirit fades like that, and it becomes sort of what we know and understand as our relationship with the Spirit, the church sort of becomes free chicken for manipulation. Right. So I'll paraphrase what he said for you guys over there. If your elders suck, it's because you suck at picking them. Yeah. So we're your ship. And if we fall and we sin because we're human, I'm sure you can forgive us, but if it's something that prevents us from performing our task any further, then I expect you. And it's in Scripture that you're supposed to come forward and say, hey, might be time to step down. That happens in everyone's life 2 or 3 times. Yeah, you blame me for your decisions. I get it, I feel it. I always say it that way specifically, though. But it's a burden and a blessing. Don't get me wrong. Sir?
I think it's so important today is that when we are selecting elders, that they have wisdom and experience, because these early elders, that's why they were elders, because of the experience they had and the knowledge and the wisdom. And that's why the people
Right.
respected, because they knew these guys knew what they were doing.
I would move those 3 things you said around. You said knowledge, experience, and wisdom. I would put wisdom, knowledge, and then experience as third. Because in the early church, we're all early church. Some of us have been together since day one, and we're no older in experience as a Christian than anyone else. But perhaps the Spirit has come upon a person in a way that clearly marks him for that responsibility. And that's the power of the Spirit in the early church, and I think that's a lot of what it does. It designates people to do things just by grabbing an override on your life and saying, congratulations, you can speak in tongues. Go talk to these people. Or congratulations, you can interpret or you can understand Scripture well. Those are all gifts. So Paul leaves us guidance and on maintaining election so that they can do the things we're asking them to do. And back then, it's very distinct. Yes, since we're confusing terms, old tribe elder with this type of elder, there's some leadership overlap and bleed over in responsibility. But their primary responsibility was to the Word. And if you needed anything done, they would just be like, you got to go get a deacon. And here's the guidance and instruction on that selection. I'm over here with the Word. And it isn't until post-apostolic age that we start seeing that fight for authority take place and an over-consolidation. So that's everything we just said. Like I said, I left my phone at home today for the first time in 12 years, so I don't have my notes in front of me to lead me to the next slide. How do you know when an organization has achieved failure in success? Which is odd, right? It's a way you don't hear it too often. Anytime that the leadership and management no longer wants to structure a change. I don't care how rich the company is. I don't care how much money they've made. Once they no longer adapt to change and they no longer seek it out, I don't care how much longer it does live, it's on the backside of its life cycle. So, this in fact is the second to last slide. What's the Edict of Milan? It's the declaration of religious tolerance in the Roman Empire, right? Constantine actually becomes a Christian. Now we're leaping. Take a pause and talk about AD 312? Yeah, for 6 years. Because something happens to the church when it begins being led by men with agendas, and persecution is lifted. As long as the church is under persecution, it always seems to do just fine. I don't know, something about pain and threat of death just makes it pure. And when you're willing to die for it, you're willing to jealously guard it and protect it. And that lasts till about 150, 160. And then something really weird occurs. There's intermittent peace as the empire begins to just accept Christianity. They're like, well, we really just, as long as you are cool with us, we're cool with you. There are periods of blame and violence in between all that. But the church realized, or the empire realizes after 6 generations that this thing isn't going away. But they pay taxes. So they don't mind them. And the Roman Empire has always been very open to the worship of any and all gods. The friction comes in when they try to ask us to do all of those. And we say, no, we've got one, and we're happy with him. And the emperor's not so happy with that. And then you get persecutions. And they vary by size and length and duration in different parts of the empire. There are parts of the empire where you can live your entire life as a Christian and never suffer one day of persecution. So in the peace and prosperity, you know what happens? People walk around from city to city and try to exert the authority of their church over others. That's the history. And by the time Constantine is converted, it's happened enough to where you can see about 5 areas of consolidation where people are exercising broad authorities over large swaths of what's Christianity in the Roman Empire. And so, they're the boss of a bunch of towns. By the way, we claim that we're based on the first century church model, but in the churches of Christ right now, today, there are churches that are doing exactly what I just briefed to you. They're starting churches and never giving them autonomy. History only repeats. It's silly. So, question for you, and then we can release for the morning as we get ready for worship. Do we want to continue this discussion all the way through post-Edict of Milan until now, over the next week, or do we want to move on to the next topic? Because once we get to the Edict of Milan, everything changes. And the church becomes the universal church, which we call Catholic, for a couple of thousand years. But it is part of our history. You didn't just spontaneously explode into being in 1898, ladies and gentlemen. That ain't the way this worked. All right, so we'll take a and then after that, I have 3 more topics left on the list. If you've got another one that you want, let me know. If not, I'll continue to work with the elders to see if we can come up with a topic for a morning class, unless you give me one. So, again, I won't be here February 26th and March 19th. So please, if you've got a class that's in the back of your mind that you want to give, those days are available. With that, we're complete. Thank you for your time.